This podcast is brought to you by Big Motoring World, one of the UK's largest used car supermarkets. Welcome to Legends of News, the podcast that talks to the journalists who've had a front row seat at the making of history over the last half a century and more. We're going to be hearing from the people who were on the spots when the most extraordinary and significant events unfolded right in front of them, who interviewed the good, the great, and of course the not so great, and who spent thousands of hours keeping us informed on our televisions and radios. Many of them are colleagues and rivals, sometimes both, during my own 40-odd years in broadcast news. My guest today has spanned the world of news and current affairs for 40 years, maybe a bit more. She best became known when breakfast television first burst upon the nation and transformed our viewing habits forever. She's known for her approachable but incisive style and has many more strings to her bow than news, all of which we're going to discuss today. She's currently working on a fascinating documentary about her father's wartime contribution. Please welcome to the podcast, Anne Diamond. You're very welcome, Anne. Hello to you. I'm delighted to have you here. And I want to start at where we are now, really, because I mentioned that. I'm fascinated. You're researching your father's story and made, an incredibly important contribution to the war effort. Tell us more.
Well, he was part of the team that invented radar,
Blimey.
if you want to put it that bluntly. But of course, because they were so very serious about the Official Secrets Act, and it remained one of the longest lasting secrets of the war, he never ever said anything about it, nor did any of his colleagues. I was brought up in a town called Malvern in Worcestershire, which is where in the end all of the radar scientists were taken to. And it was kept a total secret for years, many decades. But I grew up living with other families whose mums and dads were radar scientists. Everybody you lived with were radar scientists. We knew, us kids, that it wasn't carrots that helped you see in the dark, it was radar. But other than that, our parents never told us anything about the work they did in the war. And they sort of died with that secret. And, it was really very sad and very weird that when my father died, my mother was completely taken aback by the eminent scientists who came to his funeral. She hadn't asked them, she wouldn't have known their names, but they came and they all wore Macs, I seem to remember, and funny little hats. And then they all disappeared into the ether afterwards. And after that, my sisters and I started to talk really seriously about what did they do in the war? We know it was radar, but what was that all about? And I've unfolded the most incredible story of these amazing men and women who did most incredible things, and many of whom sacrificed their lives testing radar, and for whom they were never thanked particularly. They just went back to their jobs, or like my father, he went on in the world of radar. And nobody ever said anything. And they've never had any medals, or they've never had any recognition, and it's just so sad. So I've just been digging and digging, and the more I've dug, the more fascinating people have come out of the woodwork. Amazing people.
It has parallels, doesn't it, with the code breakers, the people who broke the Enigma code, which also made a huge contribution to the war effort. Of course, again, loads, hundreds, thousands of people who, when the war ended, kind of went and got other jobs and never talked about it ever again. Do you think that is just partly generational? Or you mentioned the Official Secrets Act, but it was just, I'll be boasting to tell you what I did. Was there a bit of that?
Both of those things, I think. I mean, the town where I grew up in, as I said, everybody's mum or dad was a radar scientist. And you never asked them what they did in the war. You just didn't. So there's also the modesty, of these average looking guys who weren't. And that's charming in itself. But I've had so many letters since I've set up a website called Radar Families. I've just asked for other radar kids like me. Now, I'm hardly a kid anymore, but if we don't tell the stories, the little occasional stories that our parents came out with, then it'll all be lost. And so I've been inundated with stories from other people whose parents were radar scientists. Little tiny things like one of them I had the other day said, my dad never told my mum what he did in the war. He used to go away every week and work and then come back occasionally at weekends. And she was convinced he was having an affair. It was only after the war that we learned that he was doing this top secret radar work in Malvern. Wow. Another one used to say, he wrote to me and said, I was always so ashamed because when I asked my dad what he did in the war, he said he just made chocolate wrappers in a chocolate wrapper factory. He made window, which we know now as chaff, which played an enormous counter. It was a radar countermeasure. Yeah. And he was doing heroic work measuring out this stuff that was specially, it helped us invade on D-Day. It was, but he said in his letter, I was always ashamed of him because everybody else's father at school, everybody else's father was a soldier and my dad wasn't. And I always thought he was a coward.
My goodness
incredible letters like that. They're human stories, and I, like you, love a human story.
Brilliant, but it illustrates the whole. That's the point, through the human story. We could talk about this all day. I've got one more question. How did you come across it then? If you never spoke about it, did your mother give you some papers? Was there something in the attic, in the basement that told you more? Yeah.
Dug out a few things, but again, all very secret. You need to find other people who can actually help you understand them. For instance, I've got this wonderful table of the people who were working in different teams under Bernard Lovell, who was who became Sir Bernard Lovell. He was my dad's boss, and the people who worked in the teams. One of which was a lady called M. Lee. Now she turns out to be, the more I dig, she's Mary Lee, who is Tim Berners-Lee's mother.
Wow.
And there are lots of, they're incredible. One of the members of the team was a guy called Alan Bloomline, who very sadly died in an aircraft when he was testing radar. They say if he'd lived, he would now be a household name. But he invented, right before the war, in the Abbey Road studios at EMI, he invented stereophonic sound. There's a plaque outside the door, Alan Bloomline, inventor of stereophonic sound. He went on to work with the radar team. There are loads of people like that whose stories I want to tell.
It's story after story, which we'll have to watch it when it goes out to get them all. But my mouth is watering with anticipation. But what it illustrates to me, because this is about you and your career as well, is the curiosity you have. That's, you're bringing all those years of journalistic nous to this, your own family story, but it's skills you've honed, skills you probably always had, of just wanting to hear those stories in an accessible way.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm hungry for a good story. A lovely beginning, middle, and an end story. But it's better if it's about real people, isn't it? Much better than it's about celebrities or something like that. I still want to. I'm going to ring up Tim Berners-Lee and say, I want to interview you, but not about you. And that's the point. I just think that ordinary people's stories are often more fascinating. And I've always been a bit like that ever since I was a junior reporter on the Bridgewater Mercury. And I used to get sent out to, housing committees. And sometimes you'd get sent out as a very junior reporter to weddings and funerals. And even they would have an amazing story, usually.
Or 100th birthdays, what's your recipe for a long life? Always have a tipple.
Babies, Christmas Day babies, leap year babies, all of them have a story. Human beings are fascinating.
But a lot of people will be surprised just to hear that, and that, you were an inky hack. You've got, journalistic bones. Properly, clattering typewriters and all the rest of it. Because, in terms of bursting, as I said, onto the public consciousness, there you were on a breakfast sofa looking bright and breezy at 6 a.m. in the morning and, sitting with people in fluffy jumpers. You'd done the hard yards.
Yeah, I remember being terrified about that because I can interview somebody about their life and times and whatever they've done. But then my first week in TVAM, we were told that it was the Oscars. I knew nothing about Hollywood movies and who the big stars were, let alone how to interview them. Where do you start? But you have to learn. And actually, even they're interesting usually. And they were.
Yeah, let them talk about themselves is the rule of thumb, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
But I do like the sounds of their own voices. But I mean, even before that, you got into television. It wasn't straight from Bridgewater to Camden Town, was it? It was you were at Central, weren't you, before with Nick?
Yeah, I did BBC West in Bristol for a few years. That was brilliant, wonderful. And then and from there, I went to ATV in Birmingham, which became Central, and that's when I met Nick. Yeah,
Nick Owen, of course. So, I mean, but, let's just, I mean, you and I remember it. I mean, seared in my consciousness just what a revelation it all was. Those breakfast programme wars of 1983. Of course, the BBC got on the air first with Breakfast Time, Frank Boff, Selina Scott et al., and kind of, planted their flag. And then along came, before you, TVAM, with its super serious approach. These legends of everything news brought.
Famous Five.
David Frost, Michael Parkinson, Robert Key, who else? Angela, of course, Angela.
And
it bombed.
Yeah.
How did you feel then being wheeled in, when that lot were being shuffled out?
Well, I mean, on their very first day, they did a 20-minute interview with Norman Tebbit. I mean, that is no way to grab an audience on your first day, is it? It was Greg Dyke who then came in as part of the rescue mission. And he said to Nick Owen, who by then, he'd been a sports reporter, by then he'd been brought in to replace David Frost, which was a heck of a shock for him. And Greg Dyke said to him, look, you need a woman alongside you. Do you know anyone good? And he said, well, have a look at Anne Diamond. And I was reading the lunchtime news on BBC One at the time. And Greg had a look at me at lunchtime that day and he said, she looks a bit serious. Because you do when you read the 1 o'clock news on the BBC. And Nick said, no, you've got to meet her. She's not like that. And we took off from there and it was brilliant. And then Roland Ratt joined us and Wincy Willis. And it really started to grow and grow and grow.
What's that joke about Roland Ratt? It's the only time that a rat's joined a sinking ship and saved it.
Saved a sinking ship. Yeah, that's right.
But it was. How did you adapt then? You mentioned, the movie stars, but just that mix. I mean, I've done breakfast television way later than that, and it had got a bit more serious at the BBC. But nevertheless, you do have to seg from breaking horrible news stories to how to make a perfect pavlova. I mean, it just goes all over the place.
I know, but it's brilliant fun. I don't know. You just do have to develop the gear change, but that's why you have to trust your co-presenter utterly, I think, and change from the light to the dark, very serious to then just sort of whatever. I mean, I've had some moments when Dennis Healy walked out on me.
What happened there?
Adam, yeah.
What happened?
Oh God!
Go on, tell us.
Well, the Sun.
Let's just put that in. Dennis Healy, famous bruiser, ex-Labour Chancellor, and just generally quite hard to deal with.
Except that he had a funny side to himself, and he used to like showing that off. If you remember, he used to do the nationwide pantomime every year. Anyway, he was such a huge character, but. We were in the middle of a run-up to an election, I think. And The Sun had done a big front-page story about his wife having gone privately to a doctor to have an operation on her hand. And meanwhile, at the same time, Dennis was campaigning big time on the NHS and nobody should go private. And I think he'd actually really criticised Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister at the time, for going private. And I held up The Sun and I said, but Mr. Healy, your own wife, Edna, has gone private. And he absolutely went ballistic. Where are you having your Diamond? Where are you having your baby Anne Diamond? Because I was about 9 months pregnant at the time. And where are you? I bet you're going private. And I said, yes, but I'm not a politician. And he stormed out of the studio, ranting and raving. And Adam Bolton, who was our politics editor,
I worked with for many years at Sky News,
came down from the upstairs in the offices and he thumped Adam Bolton in the chest and went storming off, and it made every front page the next day. And Michael Heseltine, who was also on the sofa at the time, just sat back with a Cheshire cat like grin and let the moment happen. So it had some amazing moments live as well.
I mean, that's one of the right reasons, if I can put it that way, to be in the press if you're a journalist. But of course, you weren't just a journalist here. Obviously, as I say, burst on the scene and this phenomenon turning round this rather shaky operation. I mean, you became tabloid fodder as well. It was just,
Yes.
what's Anne wearing, what's Anne doing?
The 80s were merciless. It was a terrible time to be a woman in Britain famous, because you were tabloid fodder. Everything you did and everything you didn't do was reported on. I mean, it was said that I demanded doilies under my coffee cups. And, all sorts of extraordinary diva type things were attributed to me, that it was just rubbish, but they had to run with rubbish when they couldn't run with real stories.
Do you think it all started then? I mean, it did, didn't it? That's when it took off, so-called celeb. And we found, I've been a man on television news, which is very different, but it is weird that the newspapers, you think, especially if you started in one, you think, well, we're all the same,
Yes.
Why is anyone interested in me? I'm not interested in you.
Yeah, I was naive enough to think that just because I was on television, I was still a journalist, but it wasn't true. Because you were on television, you were press fodder. And that was very difficult to handle all the time.
But it never stopped, did it? Because years later, you appear at the Leveson Inquiry into phone hacking and stuff. I mean, you've had it all your life, basically.
Yes. It was the one thing that, we all remember Princess Diana in our own way. But whenever I used to bump into her, she always said, I wish I could do what you do in the morning. At least you can hold the newspaper up on television and say, this isn't true.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you can come on any day you want and do that. But she never did. But
that's a pity.
She had it very bad.
I've got to say, you've got the cocked head and the eyes actually very good. Oh, okay. No. Very, very, very good impression.
We all learned that off Diana, I think.
Well, let's talk about the nice stuff, because then you, when did you left in the 90s, didn't you?
Gosh, yeah. I was there 10 years.
And when they I think they changed it, didn't they? But you reunited with Nick then for, again, taking on the BBC and Richard and Judy during the
they were ITV,
mid-mornings.
We were BBC then.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, the other way around. Come on.
We ran for 4 blooming good years. It was terrific because we sort of invented it. We were able to sit down and design it the way we wanted to design it and have the sort of people on we wanted. And it was brilliant. It was really good. It was one of the most enjoyable. I mean, I always say that I've been so lucky to have such brilliant jobs in my time. I mean, as a regional reporter, I had a fantastic time because they were spending money like water trying to regain their franchise. So I used to be helicoptered all around the Midlands, which was wonderful. And then when I started to read the news as well. And then I had TVAM, which was just the most brilliant decade there ever has been. And then we had Good Morning with Anne and Nick, which was fantastic too. And I've just been so lucky to have such brilliant jobs. Really lucky. And
tell me about memorable interviews. And I'm thinking here, not just the prime ministers and senior politicians and royalty and the rest of the good and the great that you've spoken to. But I mean, is it with like me, what resonates is some of the ordinary people who've been thrust into extraordinary circumstances and the stories they tell and how they deal with it. It's a bit like what we've been talking about with your dad. It is just those that stick with you as well.
It is, isn't it? But it's also events like the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was there that weekend, and I remember saying to my
chance
editor,
on holiday.
No. I said to my news editor, the wall is going to come down. I can feel it. I know it. And he said, why? How do you? But I'd been to Berlin several times, and I said, no. You've no idea if they're letting people clamber up onto that wall and chip bits off. The wall is coming down. You've got to get me out there. And in the end, he agreed. And I went out there and met a crew that were being dragged up from various different countries around. And the wall did come down the next morning, and I was there, and it was incredible. I was standing there doing interviews with various people with the wall behind me and people climbing all over it with pickaxes and everything. Wow. And I couldn't figure out whether I was live on air or not because I couldn't hear anything through my earpiece except lots of other people. And then I heard an American voice cueing me into VT83. And I thought, well, we don't have 83 VTs. So I'm obviously listening to somebody else's gallery, but I just kept talking. It was ABC were on a big plinth next to me. I mean, everybody was
Shouting.
there, but it was fabulous. Yeah, it was absolutely amazing being there. And all the people came crowding through Checkpoint Charlie. And you could only think, well, I don't know that much German. Just say, Willkommen. Oh, it was
good for you. That's what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
But do you think, I mean, just on that, in terms of you were there too, all the archive footage we see, the Jeremy Paxmans and co there, breakfast television was and is still slightly looked down on, the idea that because the fluffy stuff and the horoscopes are there, you can't do hard breaking news. And there you were.
Yes, we did. Exactly. And I can't understand why you have to explain to newspaper journalists who've got this sort of very aloof point of view, oh, you're so fluffy. I mean, excuse me, you have cartoons in your newspaper. You have adverts all over the place. You have horoscopes and lots of silly stuff. That's exactly what we do too. I mean, in the early days, we did read out the bingo numbers, which was, one of Greg Dyke's brilliant ideas. But, you have to keep trying to get your audience, and in the end we did.
We'll take a short break there. This podcast is brought to you by Big Motoring World, one of the UK's largest used car supermarkets. Big Motoring World checks vehicle pricing regularly to give you their best price guaranteed. And with their new finance package, you can get a rate as low as 9.9% APR, 11.9% APR representative. With a wide choice of vehicles and a focus on customer service, Big Motoring World supports drivers through each step of the process. Their stated aim is to be, in their words, big on what matters to you. Search bigmotoringworld.co.uk to verify and to find your nearest store. That's bigmotoringworld.co.uk. And you can talk about this as much or as little as you like. You sadly lost your son, Sebastian, in 1991. I'm sure it's seared forever in your memory. Of course it is. And you dealt with it as much as any parent can deal with that. But you turned it into something which has a legacy. I mean, has been truly, truly positive. And we now do not know just how many babies your campaign and building awareness has managed to save. I mean, it was sudden infant death syndrome, wasn't it? Known as cot death.
Cot death, yeah. Well, yes. I mean, the last time the doctors, and I worked with them so closely for so long, we still keep in touch. But the last sort of time it was calculated, which was probably about 10 years after, was the campaign. It saved at least 20,000 babies' lives. But of course, that was just then, because obviously the legacy goes on and on and on. And as the campaign in Britain became so successful, obviously other countries started to take it up. And I remember writing to Hillary Clinton at the time, who, if you remember, Bill Clinton had just made her head of health or something, Secretary of State for Health. I think that lasted about a year. I couldn't get through to her at all, but I was saying, look, I was trying to say, you've got to understand, in this country, we are massively saving babies' lives. Why won't you even reply to me? And she never did. But they took up their own. They took their own campaign up in the end, but they were much later at it.
I didn't realise that. So it's gone international. So we can just
it's all
multiply
over
the number. It's exponential.
Yes, exactly. So I mean, that's the time I spend talking about it, and when I was campaigning for it, I always think it's the time I spend with Sebastian.
Yeah,
he's still part of my life, obviously.
And the other boys. I mean, yes, of course, yeah.
Well, when I got the OBE, I wanted all of the boys to be there with me. And we've got a little lineup, and I'm standing where Sebastian should be. So there should be 5. There's always a gap.
Any of them interested or gone into the media, the broadcasting world?
Yeah, at least one. But if I drop his name, he'll kill me.
No, absolutely not.
But no, the others are into computing and science again. They've got their grandfather's genes.
Yeah, all the rage as well. Yeah, it's the future, that is for sure. And look at us doing our shiny podcast.
No, they're really, really worried they're going to be replaced by AI.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously worried.
Well, do you think that's going to happen with news? I mean, what is happening? I know, back up to where we are now. You're still at it on, if I can put it that way, on GB News.
Well,
which is very rarely.
AI?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know it's not an AI version of me? Because it is getting that good. I think we should all seriously worry. Have you seen any of the podcasts from Moses? Literally,
yeah.
There's this guy, he's Moses, and he is doing a podcast from the top of Mount Ararat or whatever. And I think that's an actor playing Moses. It's not, it's AI. It's completely and utterly convincing. Now, if they can do that, I think both you and I are, in danger.
Okay, well, we'll keep doing the podcast. They can't talk like this. They don't know the stories we know. But there is, the other side of that is for journalists, on-screen journalists, wherever it is. It's the stories that come up. There was a recent case, wasn't there? It was in the newspaper of some couple who couldn't live on 300 grand a year or whatever, and it was picked up because, they couldn't send their kids to private school. Completely... well, might have been checked a bit, but completely AI generated and, rapidly withdrawn. But there may well have been stories broadcast or written about that we don't know about that were AI generated. And the checking just gets so much harder.
It is a worry. It's also a very useful tool. I mean, I find it incredibly useful. I'm using it more and more. But we've got to learn how to live with it.
There's also, but there is old journalistic now, isn't there? I remember, and I was reading, it's the anniversary a couple of days ago as we record this of Dame Vera Lynn's death. And I remember being live on air, you know what it's like in a breaking news studio, and, young producers who'd never really even heard of her said, Dame Vera Lynn. I just Googled her. Apparently, and they went like this off her Wikipedia page, apparently Norman Wisdom wrote the White Cliffs of Dover for her. And he was the right age.
What?
And I just went, and, because I've had very little to say. And I went, in my head, I just went, no, he didn't. He really didn't. I don't know who did, but he really, really didn't, And luckily you get a guest on and, the producer's going, go with it. It's a great story. We've got pictures of Norman Wisdom. And I'm going, oh, my God. But it is having a hinterland that counts as well in those moments, isn't it? It's not just about the research.
I've got a lovely Vera Lynn story because I was working at BBC Nationwide and the first thing they ever let me do as a presenter was I co-presented the nationwide Rock and Pop Awards, which actually later transmogrified into the Brits, but not that year. I can still find it. And I was really worried because that is done, instead of being done by BBC Current Affairs, you were taken over by Light Entertainment. And suddenly I was expected to wear high heels and a sort of mini dress. And I was really uncomfortable about what wardrobe put me into. And I was so worried. I was saying to this young researcher I was working with, Virginia, and I said, look, I just don't think this is me. And she said, well, I've got an outfit at home that might be a bit more you. And she came in with it. And it was a lovely sort of like a trouser suit. And it was really beautiful. And she and I got on so well. And it was only when we got to trust each other completely, she told me she is Vera Lynn's daughter, Virginia. Virginia Lewis, her name. Absolutely lovely, lovely girl. Yeah.
And it's not just telly you're known for. I mean, you really do have so many strings to the bow. Radio, you do have done and do quite a lot of that.
I have done radio, yeah, quite a lot. It's a very different world, radio. And I don't think I'm anywhere near as good at it because you have to keep remembering all the time about what people can't see and explain it to them. And then I don't know whether I'm a natural radio person, but I have enjoyed my time. I've worked a lot at Radio Oxford and BBC Radio Berkshire. And I've had some wonderful times there and some brilliant people to interview and lovely teams. Actually, the more I think about it, the more I did enjoy it.
And can still. How did you get lured back into television news then? Well, what was that about, deciding to, especially breakfast television? I know, and you're a spring chicken, but those hours are quite grueling, aren't they? Getting up at that time.
I got lured into GB News by Steve Dixon. Who you know from Sky News.
I do. Lovely.
He rang me up one Christmas and said, would you ever come on as a guest to review the newspapers? Because I'm going to move from Sky to GB News. And I said, oh, wow, yeah, that's really brilliant. Yeah, of course I'll come on. And he said, well, and I said, who are you co-presenting with? And he said, well, we don't yet know. Haven't managed to snare somebody yet. And I think that he had his eyes on a couple of people from Sky, but they didn't join him in the end. And I said, look, if you are really hard up, I'll come for a couple of weeks to get you off the ground. And that's what I did. And I'm there 3 years later now.
And how do you deal with the mornings? I mean, did you just go back into default mode from the TVAM? Yes. I mean, what's your routine?
Well, literally just to get your legs out of the bed at 2:15. If you get your legs out, the rest of you just sort of has to follow. And that's the only hint I have. I mean, that and 3 alarms, which are all distanced from the bed in different ways. But yeah, I mean, my ex-husband used to say in the early days of TVAM that our marriage was haunted by the ghost of Anne's lost sleep. And it was a very good way of putting it, because that's all you think about. You'll have known from doing it yourself. All you think about when you're doing those shift hours is, have I had enough sleep? When will I have enough sleep? Can I do that? Or will I only get 2 hours? It'll be 3 hours before then I have to get up. You're always calculating in your mind how many hours you still got left to work or sleep or do anything. And sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night, or it could be the middle of the morning if it's dark. You think, have I done my shift, or am I just going to do it? It's a horrible, horrible thing. And you live with that. The clock absolutely dominates your life completely.
But your viewers thank you for it. I mean, it resonates with me. It was a technique I never mastered. If only I had consulted you, Anne. I like the idea of the alarm clocks lined up. You have to get out and knock them down. It's like some kind of game of alarm clock dominoes. We're nearly out of time. Tell me, I forgot to ask, so let's end with this, because I'm really looking forward to seeing it. The radar story, it's your father's radar story. How many episodes, when's it on and where's it on? And if people are listening and watching to this after it's gone out, so it'll still be there, where is it?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's on, the first episode is up already. It's on Viking TV.
Right.
And because that's, I work on Viking TV quite a lot now. It's something that Viking Cruises came up with during lockdown. And I know them very well because I'm godmother to one of their ships. And, oh my dear! And
must have to get that quite a present.
Is there anything I can do? And they said, yeah. How about going live every Thursday with a guest? And that's what I did during lockdown. It was wonderful. So it's on Viking TV, and if you just look at Anne Diamond tracing my father's footsteps, or Anne Diamond radar, you'll get it. But that tells his story of how he was brought up and ended up being a radar scientist. But then we have more episodes to do on the way radar was then taken to Malta. Malta was the most bombed place on earth in World War II, but it was the first place we put British radar, and it saved Malta. And then there's amazing stories from Norway, Hawaii I've been to, where obviously they had radar at Pearl Harbor, and it detected the incoming squadron from, all of the kamikaze bombers. It detected it. The only trouble is they'd only had radar for about a day and a half, and the operators didn't know how to translate it. They didn't know. They knew it was telling them something, but they didn't know what. And then you start to think, well, what if they had known, if they'd had enough time to fight back? Well, how would history be different? And there are lots of stories about German radar too. So, I mean, there are so many incredible. The radar thing is just unrolling in front of my eyes, and I'm not clever enough, and I'm certainly not young enough to really get to grips with it, but I'm going to try my best.
Well, you're perfect with that family connection to tell us all about it. Seems like we're going to see another dimension to the many dimensions of Anne Diamond, war history. Wow, I can't wait to watch it. And we're out of time. Thank you so much for talking to us on the Legends of News podcast. You're in the Pantheon.
Thank you.